Fellas, today we're going to be reading an article here between DMG and Paul Tassi. This is the final interview between Destiny 2's departing community manager, DMG/Dylan, and essentially an inside look on his time at Bungie. Now, if you're an avid Destiny player, chances are there are 3 letters and 2 numbers that mean something to you. dmg04. That's the hand of Dylan Gaffner, 32, lead Bungie community manager for Destiny 2, who just departed the role as of a few days ago. Gaffner has been one of the highest profile community managers in the industry, with nearly 280,000 followers on Twitter and part of a team who won Game Award in 2019 for best community support. He's experienced the highs of millions of players hanging on your every word and the lows of millions of players hanging on every word. I want to speak with Gaffner before he left on a social media detox trip for a while and ask him about his time at Bungie and what other CMs and the community themselves could learn from his time there. So from Tassi, how did you get your start in the industry? And how did you end up in your last role at Bungie? DMG, the start was a lot of being in the right place at the right time. Since 2004, I've been a big fan of Bungie. Lots of time spent on forums meeting folks who became lifelong friends. Joined a few clans, one of which had a pretty healthy group of folks who made Halo maps in Forge. We had a weekly ritual, Customs Friday, which eventually led to a map or 2 being noticed by Bungie folks and making it into matchmaking. Jesus, I wish we had that, right? Forge Bungie. Went to a few PAX weekends, hit up the ODST truck tour back in the day, got some FaceTime with Bungie folk, shout out to the workplace, and when Destiny was going through the first launch, a few were looking for people with a good mind for customer service. I'd been working in retail for a few years and knew I needed a true career to be able to support myself and my daughter. Had an opportunity to bring a bunch of learnings to the studio that was taking its first step into live service. Many thanks to Deej for giving me a chance back then. Started on a contract, helping to build out the help forum process, help guides, and attend triages for bugs, all that fun stuff. Was lucky enough for a full-time spot to open up. After a few releases, Destiny 2 rolled around, and the team realized they needed more than 2 individuals on the community team to a player base of millions. No lie, I think Cosmo and Deej were the only ones on the team for like a long time, which is crazy. Bungie didn't have quite a few social side teams, so the majority was on community. Cosmo and Deej have been on deck, but sorely needed a break, and I ended up as acting community manager through Curse of Osiris, aka was the CM, but not actually on the CM team. Ooh, that's a rough expansion to be CM on, right? Prove some worth, then went through the interview loop for a full-time community manager position. Since then, it's all been what you've seen online, but quite a bit behind the scenes, interacting with fans, collecting feedback, assessing priorities, speaking for players in various meetings, helping to build out larger CM teams, communications, planning, and strategies, and much more. To be clear, I was just one hand in all of that. Cosmo has been a North Star of sorts for a long while. Really awesome to see more folks joining the team on the US side and internationally. Earlier in the career, there was a bit of backpacking as things were still being fleshed out, but it was awesome to see how things have grown since 2015. Being a piece of that alongside some crazy smart members of the team over the years was a pleasure. Now from Tassi again, how would you define the role of community manager heading into 2023, as the job description seems like it keeps adding more and more responsibilities in time? It depends on what the studio is looking for. Focusing on my experience in live service games is a mix of bridging the gap between players and developers, but also seeking and solving as many problems as you can identify. Sometimes those solutions are giving recommendations to teams on what could address feedback items, where other times it's helping to plan long-term communications to guide the player conversation. You could be speaking to a game-specific topic or looking at world events and helping your studio to speak up for what's right. If anything, I'd say community is cross-team centric. Your work footprint may span multiple disciplines in a single day, so it's hard to draw a line and say exactly what a CM role is for the industry as a whole. I will say, guys, that's very true, especially for Destiny. CMs over there, man, all of them, they have to go meeting to meeting between everything, whether it's sandbox, technical, or directive leads. There is a lot of different roles that a CM has to fill, and what the stress is that normally they're the mouthpiece of the studio, so they have to retain and understand everything that's being said and then somehow put it on paper in a way that we, the community, can understand. Now, sometimes the studio will have strict teams for a given specialty: social media, community management, player moderation, the list goes on. For smaller places or teams just starting to venture into a given type of a game, you may end up wearing 20 hats to start. It can be fun, it can be overwhelming, but if anything, it's insightful. Lots to learn, even if things always feel like they're on fire. To me though, the most important thing for a community team is to embrace a sense of humanity and connections. Game studios are full of people that want to surprise and delight their audiences. Gaming communities are full of people that want to connect over a slew of similar hobbies or passion projects. The key word in these statements is people, not employees, not consumers, not workers or customers. One of the most important things I found was identifying the opportunities to share human interests, to remind players that we're all on the same level. We're all here to enjoy some kick-ass games and to potentially stumble on friendships that can last a lifetime. Now, what are some of your favorite memories regarding regarding the Destiny community during your time in the role. From DMG here, it's hard to point to singular moments, but I'd say my favorite memories stem from seeing players understand how important they are to Bungie or to the community. As a CM, some small actions can make all the difference. They aren't pre-planned, but just moments of being human, so to speak. Taking a moment to ask one of your favorite cosplayers for an autograph, sharing the art of your community and making sure they're getting credit for the amazing work they've done, setting up signing tables at conventions to introduce Guardians to talented voice actors that brought their favorite characters to life, or small spaces where clans can meet up for the first time in person and share some stories. I'll admit, it's been far more difficult to form these memories during COVID-19, but many of those interactions simply moved to an online space. Very thankful to have so many folks continue to rally around Bungie Foundation events to support fellow community members or simply people around the world in need. Now, as a CM, you said we're listening so often that it became a meme, but over the years, it's clear Bungie does listen to a great many community suggestions, and the game is shaped in concert with the large player population. What was the process like of collecting feedback from thousands, tens of thousands of sources and distilling it for the rest of Bungie? Now, it's changed over the years, but honestly, it's a mix of a few things. There's a community team that keeps their finger on the pulse of players to see what's being talked about. It isn't restricted to social media or Reddit, but other spaces where feedback can be gathered and tracked. Looking at types of players is key. There's never been an instance where one could say the entire community thinks X, well, aside from inventory management being a bit rough at times. There are tens to hundreds of different player types, all making up different percentages of populations, and splitting those out is crucial to collecting feedback. Treating them equally is a skill in itself, but making sure each feedback item can have a seat at the table is important. Others throughout the studio also look at player feedback, and the team ends up having its own feedback from playtesting and live play sessions. All of that's thrown into a melting pot. It's pretty spectacular to watch. Sometimes, decisions end up being made due to priorities. Are there enough folks to tackle a problem? Will this negatively impact a quality of life feature in flight or other things in development? Will this solution actually solve a problem? Is this a costly band-aid that will end up giving enough time for a full fix, or should the team live with some negative experiences and fully focus on what can address a given problem? What if something new is in the pipe that hasn't been announced and can't be for a while because it may be delayed or canceled that could address some feedback? What if the next season completely changes the conversation, players end up completely changing topics, forgetting about the things that's being talked about in each moment? Tons of other questions can be asked, tons of other factors taken into account. Ultimately, I will always appreciate the fact that Bungie gives that seat at the table for player feedback. Things can't always be fixed, feedback items can't always be answered, but to see a team very much interested in the conversation and actively seeking to make the best live service game in the industry has always been awesome. What has it taken to handle the kind of harassment you've been subjected to as the public face of a game with millions of players? What advice would you give to similar CMs in a role like yours at any scale in that regard? The first thing I like to say is honestly a piece of advice, specifically for studios and developers. Invest in protections for your people. Build strategies to address harassment and give people the time to step away if need be. I will forever be thankful for Bungie and how they handle some issues that I experienced in 2022. As for aspiring CMs, no matter the game size, the first thing is to build appropriate boundaries between yourself and work. My worst habits cemented themselves early in the job, checking Reddit or other feedback sites first thing in the morning before rolling out of bed. Don't let yourself be consumed by the job. Keep yourself in a healthy space so when things do get a bit more difficult, it doesn't tip everything over that had been building for months or years prior. From my experiences, I'll put in a shameless plug that Bungie has some ridiculously good benefits for employees. I was able to work through mental health issues and see a therapist that worked through quite a few issues during my time there. It's becoming more of an industry standard to have those on offer, so if you're looking to get into a community space, keep an eye out for the coverage and flexibility in work hours. There are a ton of other things I could dive into, but the final thing would be to set clear boundaries with players or members of the community on what you will personally tolerate. If you're lucky enough to work at a studio that openly stands for equality, stands against hate, and is continuing to build better equity and diversity for its people, you can and likely will become a target of harassment. Do not be afraid to block people derailing the conversation. Stand true to your values. Work with your team to ensure that the studio is able to do the same for its community. Now, what is your view, the difference between helpful and unhelpful feedback when it comes to giving an opinion as a member of a gaming community? It's hard to say. Seeing the true reactions of players is very much important to understanding the emotional impact a given feedback item has. No matter how harsh or angry a post can be, there's opportunity to read between the lines and say a player has invested this much time in a given feature. This outcome in the game has driven a visceral negative reaction, and here's why. That said, the most unhelpful bits come when things get personal, when passion is prioritized over humanity, so to speak. Insults, requests for people to be outright fired, speaking down on others in a multiplayer environment to say one piece of feedback is more valid than another. Stuff like that. It takes focus off the game, puts focus on the person giving the feedback. Sometimes, leading with suggestions or what a given player wants to see as a solution doesn't always convey why change is needed. I've made this sort of mistake a bunch of times. Hell, I honestly did it during my final week, but was able to walk through it with the team to get to the center of the feedback. As an example, to say, I want a shorter round time can be a good suggestion, but it doesn't necessarily explain why. A given mode may feel too slow, or the current round time gives too much room for passive gameplay that takes advantage of mechanics that aren't entirely enjoyable to play with or against. While the shorter round time can address some of those issues, other things may still need to be changed. Another way to say it, what seems like a simple solution can sometimes point to multifaceted issues. Sometimes those solutions could have unintended consequences for other portions of gameplay. Hell, sometimes they aren't even as simple as one might assume and can completely derail the team for a day or two because of the issues it causes. Advice for aspiring community managers: never expect players to have the full game in mind when giving their feedback, and work to have patience when going through the player conversation. A lot of it can be emotionally charged on the internet. Ultimately, don't take it personally. Far easier said than done, but it's crucial to keep it all separate. Amen? You can't take it personally, really. And I think that's just social media in general. You just can't take things personally. Like when y'all send me dick pics, I can't take it personally. Sometimes I'm like, man, why? It would have been much better from this angle or this lighting. But then I have to remind myself, Cross, don't take it personally. They didn't have a professional photographer. Do you have any idea where you're heading next? Staying in community management, like Deej, who went to a different publisher? Staying in gaming, period, or just taking some time? I could say that I love to stick to gaming, but I don't really know where right now. Community and communications are things that I'm kind of good at and passionate about. I do believe I'll be taking some time for myself and family to figure out what's best in the long run. I'd love joining and building game experiences at some point in my career too. Player investment has been awesome to me as a concept since joining Bungie. The player journey, whether it be through a campaign, some post-game content, or a micro event during an otherwise chill time, just to give players something to talk about. Even if it was a bit of a rush, that first community event leveraging escalation protocol was a fun little experiment that I had the opportunity of driving. That really sparked the question of, what would getting in the dev seat feel like? That's still buzzing around in my head. I still have dreams of what something like that could look like in Destiny or many other games given different content or rewards. There will be moments of discovery in games that stick with the player for an entire lifetime. And I love to figure out how to create one of those moments someday. Turning a corner to find something unexpected, building an OP deck or a team that wipes the opposition from the map, opening a chest to find what becomes a favorite piece of gear from a game or games as a whole, defeating a literal god that has been kicking a player's ass for over a week of playtime, stuff like that. Now finally, why can't we mass delete blues? Can you pass that along? As I sit here dismantling some blues after a play session for Iron Banner, I can confidently say they're listening. Much love, and hope you have a great new year. DMG, we love you, man. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful community manager all these years. Your responses, your wisdom, the way in which you guys have handled things, honestly has been inspiring. Because if I was community manager, if people were complaining at me day and night, I would probably just reply, get shit on over and over, or get good, or call a bunch of people dumbless bastards. A combination of things, but y'all's temperament and how y'all handle things, that is something that we have always admired. We're gonna miss you a bunch. Dylan, you've been great. I'm excited to see wherever you go to next. We will be following you. And I think some of us will have our fingers crossed, hoping that one day you'll return to Bungie. Maybe just in time for Destiny 3. Well, guys, let me know in the comments below what you think of this article. And big shout out to Paul Tassi for this interview. A link to that article will be in the description below, so feel free to check it out if you like. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.